Hello everyone, welcome back to another Warrior Cats Rambling. Today we're going to talk about the most recent manga that released, A Thief in Thunderclan, starring Brightheart and Cloudtail to a lesser extent. Now, I usually wouldn't do a thing like this, because the last one I originally called it a rant, and this one isn't really because, surprise surprise, but not really, the newest book is good. Thief in Thunderclan is a very good book, which, you know, Dan Jolly really knows how to write good Warrior Cat stories. I mean, there's a reason he's wrote all of the manga to this point, and the art by James O'Barry continues to get better and better. And there's some really good art in this. Some very well done art, and also some very, graphic art, which takes the meaning of graphic novel to a whole new level. We'll talk about that a bit later. So, first off, talk about the background about this. This was announced mid-late last year, I believe, and everyone was excited. Everyone was excited to get a new manga, but also it starring Brightheart, a character who, as many felt, is severely underdeveloped, that never really got much characterization beyond the first arc. Which, you know, they're not wrong, necessarily. Brightheart's a character was very pivotal in the first arc, The Prophecies Begins, where she goes through this whole journey about kind of rediscovering herself after she's brutalized and in the dog attack, and then later when Blue Star condemns her to the Elder's Den, and gives her the name Lost Face, and that is addressed in the book. It's very trauma-filled. It's her essentially getting mini therapy. At this point in the timeline, she's already gotten over a lot of what her struggles were, but she's still very untrustworthy. It's a bit broody. Broody is the right word. It's a bit broody. She's very brooding about, oh, my clans did this to me and I don't trust them. Oh. And some of it is a bit warranted, considering what happened. But at the same time, there comes a point where you think maybe she let bygones be bygones, and by the end of the book, that is what happens. But it takes a little while to get there. When I say a little while, I don't mean that long, because out of the most recent manga, the 4 recent ones, including this one, this is by far the absolute shortest. It is significantly shorter, only by 20-30 pages, which doesn't seem like a lot, but if you compare it to other mangas in it, it's oof, which isn't bad. I don't know how they could have filled out more story in this. I definitely think it was stretching it a little bit near the end, but, you know, the content went in was very satisfactory, and hey, at least we get some good Warrior Cats content. But let's talk about Brightheart as a character, or her characterization. So Brightheart in the book is, characterized a bit differently than what she usually is, because, she's a title character. That's usually what happens with people who are supporting casts to become protagonists. So, the bulk of the story is essentially her and Cloudtail in love. They're hanging out, which is a really good dynamic, their relationship. I'll talk about that in a bit. So the story about what she kind of goes through is her essentially being very untrustworthy companions of the clan, which, there's 2 facets to this. The first facet is that she's mad about people related to Tiger Star. The reason she was scarred, that she kind of went through all this trauma, was because of Tiger Star. And so she's not really fond of anyone related to him, Longtail. That's pretty much the only person she's not really fond of. When there's more, Brambleclaw, but she doesn't really address that very much later. What's interesting, though, is that they did something that I didn't think they would actually do, which was her essentially having a very honest conversation with Longtail later. So, to kind of set up how the story went. So first off, she's very interesting. She sees Longtail and Brambleclaw talking with Tawny Pelt and another Shadow Clan warrior on the border, essentially saying, hey, we're gonna be warriors soon, which is a bit of a warriors soon, hey, it's gonna be cool. I guess kind of catching up, which, she's like, ooh, they're betraying the clan, and people are kind of like, what do you mean, they're siblings, of course they can be fine. And it's kind of understandable from both perspectives. Then, like, when he's guarding the prey, and the prey starts disappearing, which is the subplot in this book, Thief and Thunderclan is, like, stealing prey, and she thinks it's Longtail, giving it ShadowClan. Eventually, he gets his eye scratched out, because this takes place tangentially to Firestar's quest. So once that happens, which, again, very brutal scene, his eyes getting scratched out, again, I'll touch on that later, she eventually goes to the Mezen den, and they have a very kind of honest conversation, and it's very interesting, because she kind of, like, upon talking with him, kind of says that, okay, you're not the traitor, and essentially, she doesn't outright forgive him, like, she doesn't say, I forgive you, she kind of just kind of internally accepts the fact that he is not evil, that he is different. And it's very mature, like, very mature for warrior cats. And there's a lot of other scenes like this later. Like, when she's in the nursery, after Willowpell, I believe, dies, she comforts all their kits who were recently apprenticed. And she's a very mature conversation with them about, nature of death and how to move on. And it's weird, because again, this is warrior cats, and you usually wouldn't get something like this. But again, props to Dan Jolly, he knows how to write emotional scenes, and just good scenes in general. But, moving on to the next part of the bit, let's talk about the relationship, which is kind of the core facet of this book. The relationship between Brightheart and Cloudtail. Now, Brightheart and Cloudtail is probably one of the few not controversial relationships in Warrior Cats. Like, even Firestar and Sandstorm, I've seen a lot of discourse online of them being not good and underdeveloped, which, barring the fact that that's not an inherently incorrect statement, it's nice to see we actually get a functioning, I dare say realistic relationship out of this, which I did see this in SkyClan and The Stranger. We did see it there with Leafstar and Billystorm. That was a very, I call it realistic relationship, which again, this is coming from someone who's never been in a relationship, but just kind of portrayed in media. I think it's very reasonable in their characterization. Like, they have very genuine conversations, they walk about all over the place, similar to, scenes they do in other books where you have the two characters in love, they walk and they talk. But this is, like, again, it's real, because, like, they agree on stuff, like, they care for each other, but they have disagreements. Like, Brightheart believes in StarClan, Brightheart believes in SkyClan, Cloudtail doesn't. And they do have a bit of back and forth about this. It's not like arguing, it's bantering. Which, again, realistically, a relationship would have disagreements. They're not going to be perfect with each other, not going to agree on everything. And the fact that they portray those little moments where they're talking, and, like, he's saying, he's comforting her, but he's also has his own opinion. That's really nice, I like it. And they're just so darn cute, especially when they give birth to White Kit, and he's like, oh, it's so precious, so absolutely precious. Also, the final thing I want to talk about is the violence. So, anyone who's read the most recent graphic novels will have noticed that they have become increasingly violent, aka blood. And not just any blood, a lot of blood. So anyone who's read, so the first one, A Shadow and River Clan, it's normal. It's not until, I think, near the end when they fight the fox, that Leopardstar gets horribly beat up. And then, which, aside from the fact, deserved, like, I don't feel bad for Leopardstar, it's just utterly shocking, because reading Warrior Cats, we know it's not really a kid's series, but reading it, you see these things described, you picture them in your head, and you're like, oh, that's violent. But to actually see that in a visual format is mind-blowing. And the other ones, both the Winds of Change and then the ShadowClan manga, graphic novel, those are, how do I put this? Toned down. Like, there is still blood, there's still violence, but it's not as prolific. This one is much more prolific. So, one of the opening scenes, and this isn't really violent, is when she's running from dogs. And it's like, pack, kill, kill. It's very, like, intense, which, you know, there's no blood there, but it's like, oh, he's like, oh, Swiftpaw dies. Okay, it's fine. Then we get to Longtail going blind, because that's the thing in this book. Again, I mentioned earlier, it's tangential to Firestreet's quest. So Longtail goes blind, and we see that. And oh boy, do we see that. Like, his eyes are, like, gushing blood, like, he's in pain, and it's, like, all over the place. And it's like, holy... Oh my goodness. And then, that's not all. Page 172 and 173. Look it up. It's the most graphic I've ever seen Warrior Cats. So, on one scene, you have Brightheart standing in a pool of blood surrounded by dead clanmates. Next scene, she wakes up in a pool of blood, and she's looking over Swiftpaw. And I don't have anything to say to that. These books are very violent and graphic, and I'm living for it. Like, absolutely, I love it, because not only is it showing Warrior Cats in what Warrior Cats is, but I just think, like, how does it get past their, like, censors, or how were they allowed to do this? And then another question comes to mind, and I actually considered making a video about this. Who are these graphic novels for? Like, when it comes to age rating, like, books have age ratings, and these are obviously, you know, not really intended, like, for fans of the series. The only people who are going to read these newer ones are people who read, like, the first 2-3 arcs. People who are diehard fans, who've been reading for, like, 10 plus years. And I wonder if, because they are doing that, if, you know, the artist, James O'Barry, if he's kind of like, okay, these are older fans, they've been around, they know Warrior Cats isn't really a kids, so I'm not gonna make it kids, I'm gonna do violence. Which, I wouldn't say that's necessarily untrue, because James Barry, he does seem very in tune with the fans. Like, if you look on his Instagram page, I believe it is, on Valentine's Day, he posted a picture of Ravenpaw and Barley. So I'm just saying, I think he's a bit more in tune with us, the fans, than other authors, specifically Warrior Cats authors. And, what they believe. But, yeah. In conclusion, overall, a very, very good book. Very excellent. I'm excited for the next manga. I hope they continue, because genuinely, they're really good Warrior Cats content, and I really enjoy them. And I really hope they eventually colorize Tiger-san, Sasha, and the Rise of Scourge. And, so that's gonna be it for this video. Thank you all much for listening in, and hope you all have a nice day.